Yeah, my name's Joe Kazimierczyk. I live right on the Sourland Mountain. I've been here about 20 years. Been part of the Sourland Stewardship Committee for about 1 year now, I think. This used to be my front lawn. It was basically just grass, like a typical lawn with a couple of big trees in the middle. Um, I did not need to be mowing a front lawn, did not want to. So um, most of the neighboring lots are forested, and I thought I'd like to sort of go in that direction. I let it go to meadow, treated it as meadow for a couple of years. So I mowed it maybe once a year for the first 2 or 3 years. Then I decided just to stop mowing and keep a couple of paths cleared through it. And as you can see, maybe a lot of it really did a good job at going back to woods with almost no effort from myself. I mean, when I first moved here, say like 20 years ago, there wasn't all that much information available. The internet was not what it is today. Nobody was talking about invasive species. I guess gradually over the years, and I mean, more and more recently, you hear about invasive species, and I mean, I know the deer have always been a problem. I've been hiking a lot lately, and as I walk through state forests and parks, and as I'm learning more, I started seeing all these problems. Like I used to just walk by, say, Oriental Bittersweet and say like, wow, what an interesting vine. Now it's like a horror show when I see these things. Then I started, I guess, noticing in my own yard, hey, I've got a lot of these problems right here, which I just sort of totally ignored for a long, long time. I mean, partly for lack of time, lack of knowledge, and somehow I always thought just let nature do its thing is the way to go. But somebody pointed out to me recently that nature needs a lot of help these days, and I really came to realize that. Mostly because of the deer and invasive species. Those are the two big problems here.
Right. So you had mentioned, deer eating a lot of the trees, especially in the back. And you started out with, just not mowing in the front and things came up. What was the next step you took after reducing the amount of mowing you were doing?
I guess the next thing is I did a small wildflower meadow in the back of my house. I can show you that next. And then, I mean, after that, I didn't do a whole lot for a long, long time. I was still in that let nature do its thing course. I had my front yard was going back to woods nicely. My wildflower meadow was doing okay-ish. And I just left it at that for a long, long time. And like I said, until I started learning more about invasive species problems. And it was just a really big learning process the whole way.
So tell me a little bit about this wildflower meadow that you had planted. What worked for you? What didn't work?
Okay. This, to the best of my knowledge at the time, I tried to properly start a wildflower meadow. I mean, this was just turf grass when I moved here. I spent a year just sort of killing the grass and weeds that were here, planted wildflower and grass mix. Everything grew really well for a while. As you can see, I believe this is big blue stem, which gets maybe 8 feet high later in the summer. It's really impressive. I love how it looks. It's like being in a jungle back here. I never fenced this in, so the deer ate most of the wildflowers, but a few of them still survive and new things pop up now and then. But the grasses are really impressive. One problem I'm having now, you might be able to see here, is an annual grass, which I believe is carp grass, is moving in and actually out-competing some of the native grasses that I want. So I have to find a way to deal with this. One really interesting plant that's sort of come up on its own, it's rattlesnake master. These turn into white balls of flowers. It almost looks like it belongs in a desert or something, but I'm pretty sure it is native to this area. I get butterfly milkweed pops up in here, so it's not as successful as I hoped it would be, but it's coming along. And after I planted it, I didn't do a whole lot except just regularly cut it now and then. Like 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 before, I think I was just sort of letting nature do its thing. Now I'm going to try to help it along a little bit better, getting rid of some of this invasive annual grass that's moved in. One problem I had here was with trees coming down in some of the big storms we've had over the past decade, since I guess Hurricane Sandy and other big storms. Um, so many trees were falling down back in the woods. It sort of blocked off a lot the trail that I had going all the way to the back. At one point, I sort of got just disgusted with how bad it was looking there, and I stopped going back until a couple years ago. I thought I really should get back there again, and just started hacking a trail to get in there. As I started finding problems, I started dealing with them. And I mean, the obvious thing was a lot of vines in the trees, which I think probably contributed to some of the big trees coming down in the storms too, because yeah, I think getting vines out of trees is one of the first big steps to take in getting your woods into a healthier state again.
As I'm looking around, I see a lot of cages around trees. What made you decide to do that? And there's some trees that are caged, some trees that aren't caged. What made you pick ones?
My approach was just as I was clearing my trails, which really just entailed hacking through a lot of multiflora rows, which is one of the biggest problems back there. I was being careful removing the multiflora, and as I was doing it, sometimes I was finding small trees near the edges of it where they weren't being smothered and still they were getting enough light to grow. Part of the problem is that if they ever grew above the multiflora, the deer would chop them down. So they sort of had this window where I could find maybe a foot-tall tree. And as I was uncovering them, then I figured, well, I might as well try to protect this one since I've now exposed it to possible deer damage. So it wasn't really planned, just sort of haphazard protecting trees along my pathways as I went. What I'm trying to do now instead of that is I have a good trail system cut through there now. So what I'm doing is looking for these big patches of invasives that have no trees in them. A big area with no trees, I sort of hack a trail into the middle of that and plant something specifically in there to start filling in that gap in the tree canopy. But as I said, I'm just winging it.
Great. Well, I'd love to go see it.
This is near the start of my wooded area, and this is one of the spots that sort of blocked me getting back here for a long time. You can see there's a lot of trees that blew down, have fallen down, or in the process of falling down. This area here was nothing but multiflora rose and Japanese honeysuckle. Cutting a trail through here was difficult, and it's what I believe is called the disturbance climax, where just really quick, the whole forest succession is supposed to be from open field, then grasses move in, then shrubs, small trees, big trees, and the forest climax in this area would be something like oak, hickory, red maple. With invasive species and deer that prevent the native shrubs and trees from growing, what happens is you have an opening created by storms or whatever, like this. The invasives move in, and you get basically a mat of multiflora rose, honeysuckle, oriental bittersweet that sometimes can just be a mat of vines 3 feet deep. And that's the climax, and it's called the disturbance climax. And that's one of the big problems I have here in this spot and in one other big spot with a lot of downed trees. So as you can see, as I cleared away the multiflora rose, I found different saplings. I've enclosed them in wire cages or tree tubes. Some of them are doing pretty good. Poplar, tulip poplars grow really fast. This came up last spring, and it's already what's that, 3 feet high almost. I hope it gets about another foot this year. Some trees grow pretty slow, but that's life.
So when you were out here and you were clearing, you had mentioned that you were just finding little trees. So they were hiding underneath the multiflora rose and Japanese honeysuckle, kind of protected from that deer herbivory?
Yeah, exactly. So the invasives sort of protect the trees for a while, but the problem is that the trees would never be able to get above that. Because I don't think the multiflora really stops the deer. They sort of wander through just about everything. And yeah, I mean, it sort of protects the saplings for a while, but in the end, it's not good for anything.
Right.
Nothing will. The combination of the invasives plus the deer. It's so the problem was I had all these trees coming down since Hurricane Sandy, maybe before that. And as I looked around, I found, I mean, except for the small trees that were hiding under the multiflora rose, I had no small trees coming up to take the place of the big trees that were going. And there really should be a whole succession of trees at different ages in a healthy forest. Here I had old trees and nothing, basically. So I'm trying to fill in that missing step of younger trees.
Right, and it seems like this is a relatively easy and inexpensive way to reforest, just by finding those native seedlings and just removing the invasive so they can, reach that sunlight and then protect them from deer.
Yep, exactly. Here in this area, I didn't purchase a single plant. These were all things that were here or came up since I made the clearing. The only expense was some fencing to make these cages. I bought some tree tubes, these plastic things, which I have sort of mixed results with. I think I like the wire fencing better. The tree tubes seem good for some trees in open situations like this. Smaller leafed trees like the maples, but I've also tried putting tubes on things like hickories, which with that big compound leaf doesn't really have room to grow in these tubes. It probably was a dumb idea to even try it, but I didn't know any better.
Hey, you never know until you try.
Also, I found that putting tree tubes in some of the shadier areas that do have trees, it's just blocking too much light from getting to the trees also. So cutting off the light and trapping in a lot of moisture, I actually had some trees in tree tubes that were getting a black mold on the leaves. So I was sort of killing some of these trees.
How did you decide what to keep and what not to keep as far as protecting them?
I guess a couple of years ago, I was, like most people, probably pretty terrible at being able to identify trees. I mean, I knew what an oak was, a maple, other stuff. If it was a compound leaf, I couldn't tell if it was a hickory, a walnut, an ash. I tried tree identification from several different books, and I never found that too easy for some reason. Just without some additional knowledge, I think just flipping through pages trying to see what matches just wasn't working for me. I actually, small plug here for the Sourland Conservancy, I went on a tree ID walk a couple years ago with Chris Berry. He gave me just some really good practical advice about how to get started. He pointed out a couple of key features that can really single out certain trees, like bitternut hickory has a really bright sulfur yellow leaf bud in the winter months. If you see that, I mean, there's almost no doubt you don't even have the leaves yet, and you can tell that that's going to be a bitternut hickory. And other things like that I just sort of picked up. I did a couple of tree ID things with at Duke Farms. They have a good series of classes. When I'm really confused about something, there are some good Facebook groups for tree identification. I post something on there and I'll get a dozen good answers right away about what it is. Things like some trees I was really totally unfamiliar with. Persimmons. I'd never seen a persimmon before. I didn't even know they were native to this area. I actually thought it was some sort of tropical fruit. And I found out that I have some growing in my yard that I never knew were here. And that's part of the fun of it too, just sort of discovering what I have here. I feel silly not knowing that I've had persimmons, serviceberry, hackberry, high bush blueberry, but it's just an ongoing learning experience.
So what has been your most favorite discovery or thing that has come out of environmental stewardship, your land?
One really great surprise, wild orchid that I found here. It's the ragged fringed orchid. Small plant, you can almost walk right by it and not even notice that it's there. But it's a really spectacular, amazing flower when you bend down and take a close look at it. So just some interesting wildflowers. One nice surprise is how quickly some trees do grow. It's disappointing how slow some grow, but like I said, the tulip poplar grows really fast. I knew that. One thing I didn't know was persimmon and black gum, which I have back here, do a lot of sprouting from the roots. And because they're sprouting from an already mature root system, I've had some that have put on maybe 6 or 7 feet of growth in 1 year. And that tells me that if I didn't have deer here, I would have a really big, thick grove of persimmon and black gum, and sassafras also grows that fast. Unfortunately, the deer just keep chomping on them and prevent that. But with a couple of tree tubes and wire cages, I've already got a nice grove of trees started back there. And that's the most pleasant surprise I've had.
That's wonderful. So what would your advice be for somebody that wants to get into environmental stewardship and land stewardship? Where do you think, what would your advice be for them just to get started? Whether it's resources or just something that they can do right now, go out in their backyard and just start.
It's, the main thing is just starting. You have to learn a lot as you go. To me, that's, part of the fun, part of the adventure. The key is just get going, start learning as much as you can. The very first step, I would say, is getting vines out of trees, which was one of the big problems here. It was really the first thing I tackled, and fortunately, I don't have too many to actually show you that are left. Oriental bittersweet can literally strangle trees to death. They're a huge vine. They put a lot of weight on the trees. I think they probably contributed to some of the trees coming down in the storms that I've had here. So getting vines, the Oriental bittersweet, Japanese honeysuckle, get those out of the trees. Just cut them at the ground here. Leave everything in the trees hanging. You don't want to try pulling it. You could kill yourself doing that.
Good advice.
That's a good first step. And then just learning what the invasives are and start removing what you can. A little bit at a time, you'll be surprised how much progress you make over a summer. Everything I've done here is just really over the course of about 2 years.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for having us here and showing us your home and your property. It's a lot of work that you've done. It's really great to see.
Well, thanks for coming, and I hope maybe I've inspired somebody to try this in their own yard. Absolutely. Every little bit helps.
Every little bit helps, right? And, I really loved all the practical tips and sharing what worked, what didn't work, and, you've had a lot of creativity, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so if you want to learn more about the Sourland Conservancy, please check out our website at www.sourland.org. You can get involved and volunteer with us. Email us at info@sourland.org, and have a great day.